So we just had the Oscars, and Green Book won Best Picture. What a great decision. So there's a lot going on in the world of cinema at the moment. So I thought I'd talk about something else, really timely and relevant. Those gosh darn Hobbit movies.
My cup of tea. My cup of tea.
So in the early 2000s, The Lord of the Rings came out, and they were all amazing. These are like some of my favourite movies ever. They're just great. And when I heard they were doing The Hobbit, I was very excited. I really like the Hobbit book. Just a little thing. The Lord of the Rings books are like massive, and The Hobbit is just like this tiny little kid's book about a little man who goes on an adventure. But I was still excited. I was quite young at the time, so I didn't know all the drama that was going on. Like, they had Guillermo del Toro in to direct, and then mysteriously made him vanish and brought in Peter Jackson. There was a bunch of dodgy labour laws stuff, so they could exploit the New Zealand actors. So that's all good stuff. And the movies came out, and they weren't good, and everyone forgot about them. But I didn't forget. The general consensus around the time was that the movies weren't great, but there was at least some okay stuff in there. And maybe if the fans got together and kind of chopped some stuff out and jiggled it around a bit, we could have a decent movie or two. So today I'm going to be talking about The Hobbit, the Bilbo Edition, which is the fan edit that I watched the other day. So the first problem with the original Hobbit trilogy is that it was a trilogy, and they tried to make it The Lord of the Rings, so they made 3 movies that were all 3 hours long. Do you know how big the Hobbit book is? I'm gonna have to go get it so I can show you now. I don't know why I've set up this bit like this. For God's sake. I'd kick my table and everything. Here, this is a hardback copy of it, so it's not particularly small, but it's only like 300 pages long. Oh, this actually has the start of the Fellowship of the Ring in the back as well. It's like 300 pages long, and the original Lord of the Rings trilogy is about 1,000 and something. And just looking at that in terms of movies, we had 3 3-hour long Lord of the Rings movies. So if you've got a book that's like a third of the length, you should probably have 1 3-hour movie, maybe a couple of 2-hour long movies. Hey, that would be pretty good. They didn't do that. So I watched the Bilbo edition, which cuts down the like 9 hours of Hobbit movie to 4.5 hours-ish. And it's a good start. It's still way too long. There's a lot of stuff in The Hobbit. Like, I can understand wanting to make it longer. It doesn't need to be 3 movies long, but like a couple of 2-hour long movies would have been spot on. The 4.5 hour long fan edit feels way too long. It would have been best as a couple of bits. Another thing that was a big problem with the original Hobbit movies, half the stuff wasn't from the book. So you look at Lord of the Rings and you got 1,000 pages of stuff, and you're making 3 movies, and it's like, we don't need all this stuff. We can like cut out loads. They cut Tom Bombadil, who's like just a weirdo dude who lives in the woods and has nothing to do with anything. So he's gone. You've got the scouring of the Shire. The hobbits come back from their big quest, and their home is ruined. This doesn't fit in with the films. We don't need this. So they cut that. And like here and there they make little changes, and they barely add anything. Like most of the stuff is there in the books. Maybe they beef up a couple of the characters' roles, but like that's about it. The Hobbit just add a whole extra movie. There's just an entire thing. They wanted to make it more of a prequel to Lord of the Rings, when in reality Lord of the Rings was written as a sequel to The Hobbit, but also it has a completely different tone, so it's like not really a sequel, it's like just something else entirely. So they tried to make the tone of The Hobbit, this fun little children's book, a similar tone to the sprawling epic that's Lord of the Rings. And to do that, they put Sauron in it. There's like one line of dialogue in the book where Gandalf's like, I've got to go now, I need to check out this necromancer dude. And they make that like a whole subplot. You have to see Gandalf go off and fight the necromancer who's actually Sauron. Galadriel's here, Saruman's here, It's Radagast the Brown. All your favourite characters. And this entire bit just has nothing to do with the plot of The Hobbit. Like, the plot of The Hobbit is Bilbo meets a load of dwarves and he's gonna go on an adventure with them. And each chapter is like a little adventure. So the fan edit of the movie cuts all the extra stuff. There's no necromancer. Radagast is not here. There is an extended Legolas cameo in the movies. There's a whole fight scene where Legolas fights someone and he runs on some bricks that are floating in the air. And he has a crush on this girl, but she fancies one of the dwarves. And they cut all of this. It's great. You don't have to deal with any of this nonsense because none of it matters. I just want to see Martin Freeman be a funny little man. However, I'll go over some of the problems with the fan edit. My first one, it's way too long. I know you're trying to keep a bunch of the stuff that is in there from the books, but it's not watchable as a 4.5 hour movie. It doesn't feel like a movie. The Hobbit doesn't make a good film. Basically, each chapter of The Hobbit is its own little self-contained adventure. Bilbo and all the dwarves, they stop to have camp, but then they find out some of the ponies have gone missing. And they're being eaten by trolls. And then Bilbo has to come up with a plan. He's going to sneak in there and rescue the ponies. But he gets caught. And then all the dwarves come to save them, but they all get caught. And they're going to get eaten. Oh no, how are they going to get out of this one? Gandalf turns up and saves the day. Quick thinking, Bilbo and Gandalf. Do you turn those trolls to stone? Wow. That's just one chapter of the book. That's like one thing that happened. And it's his own little self-contained story. The company turns up, they find the problem, there's some trolls that are gonna eat them. They all get caught. Oh no! Gandalf saves the day. Hooray! It's a little story. And I suppose it could work in the film, but it's not set up to work like that because there's so much other stuff in the movie. The original films have all this extra stuff in, and the fan edit cuts all of it. The problem is, in cutting all of that, you get some big continuity errors, but also kind of miss out on some of the good bits. So good bits in the Hobbit movies are kind of few and far between. I'm not meaning to be rude or anything. Like, there's some really good stuff in the Hobbit movies. Martin Freeman is great. I really like him. The whole bit where they introduce all the dwarves in his home, that's really good. I was really excited when I saw that in the cinema for the first time. All the performances are actually like great. Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug is amazing. But the problem is, when you cut a bunch of the stuff, it doesn't make sense anymore. So you got a 4.5 hour long movie and you watch it and it still feels like there's stuff missing. The most drastic bits where the first movie would end and the second movie would start, or like where the second movie ends and the third movie starts. The first movie ends, they get attacked by wargs, which are big wolves, and also like the big bad guy orc. But they try and cut the orc from the rest of the movie in the fan edit. So in the original trilogy, they set up this orc. His name is Azog the Defiler. He's this massive dude, and Thorin cut his arm off at one point, and he's mad about it. And he keeps showing up for all of these movies, but he was not in the book. So in this fan edit, they commit to cutting him from everything, but it makes it really weird. So the first movie ends, they get attacked by wargs, and they get attacked by this orc dude and all his pals. Bilbo saves Thorin, and then the eagles carry them all away, and then they can see the Lonely Mountain, and Thorin and Bilbo have this really nice moment where Thorin's like, I thought you only wanted to go home, you weren't meant to come on this adventure with us, but I've never been so wrong in all my life. And he gives him a big hug, and it's a really nice moment. And it makes sense, because it's the climax of the film, and you've got to have like a nice moment to finish it on. They're stood on this cliff, they can see their goal way up ahead. It's the Lonely Mountain, that's where we're going. And he's given Bilbo a big hug, and it's really nice. Grand. I actually left the cinema for the first film feeling pretty good. In the fan edit, because they cut this orc out, you don't have this little bit where Bilbo saves Thorin, even though it doesn't really make sense for the character, but like, whatever. You don't have this nice moment, and they can't really cut it in later, so you don't have the moment where Thorin starts respecting Bilbo. And like, while that comes too early, if you want to make The Hobbit one film, it has to come at some point. But unfortunately, because this is a fan edit and you've only got the footage they recorded for the original film, you just never have that moment now. Like, that really nice moment, you just don't have it anymore. And then it awkwardly cuts to the start of the next film where they go find Bjorn, who's a man who turns into a bear. It just feels bad. Also, like, kind of a minor thing, but in the second movie, The Desolation of Smaug, Bilbo has to go into the mountain when they get there and get the Arkenstone and sneak out without waking up Smaug. Obviously, he wakes up Smaug immediately, and they have like this long scene where they talk, and it's pretty good. And it goes on forever, and he starts like chasing Bilbo around the whole Lonely Mountain, and all the dwarves have to come in, and they have this long extended chase sequence, and it's the dumbest thing in the world. And then Smaug flies off to go kill all the humans at Lake Town. And obviously, you want to cut that, because it's a stupid action scene, it takes up too much time, and it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a stupid action scene. The problem is, when you cut that, you have Bilbo enter Erebor from up in this secret door up here, and he leaves all the dwarves outside, and he comes in, and he goes down all these stairs in Erebor, he finds the Arkenstone, and now he's out at like the front entrance, and Smaug flies off, and then Bilbo comes out the front entrance, and he's stood on these cliffs somewhere else, and all the dwarves are there. And it's like, hey, weren't they over there? Because in the original film, they all come in and follow him and have a fun action scene. But they don't do this in the fan edit. So it no longer makes sense. They also cut down the role of Fili, who's one of the dwarves. In the actual movies, he has like a love triangle with Legolas and Tauriel, who they cut entirely in the fan edit because they don't matter. And it just distracts you from the rest of the film. But they make his role way smaller in the fan edit. Grand. Unfortunately, there's a long extended scene in the barrels. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm on about. It's the dumbest thing in the world. But at the end of that, Fili gets shot in the leg with an arrow. But then the fan edit cuts all that, so he never gets shot in the leg. But then later on, there's a bit where they're stealing a bunch of weapons from Lake Town to take with them to the mountain, and Thorin gives a bunch of weapons to Fili, and he's like, have you got it? And he's like, yeah, I've got it. And then Fili turns around to get on the stairs and just falls over immediately. And without the context that he'd been shot in the leg earlier and is injured, it doesn't make sense. He just fell over for no reason, and it just makes him look like an idiot. It's just the problem with fan edits, like, you can only do so much because you are working with like footage that someone else has done. It's like you show two people the original work, here's The Hobbit, and you give it to one of them and you say, you are going to record everything, and you give it to someone else and say, okay, you're going to be putting all the footage together, but you're not allowed to talk to each other. So the person goes off and they film all this stuff, and then they come back, and the person editing it is just like, what are all these scenes? None of these are what I need. I think I'm done talking about The Hobbit. I don't know, it's a really weird one for me, because like, I really like the Hobbit book, but these movies, I think I've only watched them once each. Like, I think maybe I've seen the first one a couple of times, but apart from that, I've only watched them once. So watching the fan edit was just like a weird experience. And I quite liked some of it. And it reminded me like, hey, this is why I really like Lord of the Rings. Like, there's so much good stuff here. It's just a shame that it's The Hobbit and it's only like 50% okay. They are doing a TV series based on Lord of the Rings now, aren't they? I think it's following like Aragorn as a kid. I don't know. So maybe there's hope that they'll adapt The Hobbit again one day, and this time it'll be good. A thing I would like to see if they redid The Hobbit is play up the songs. Tolkien loved writing songs, and you can see it in the first Hobbit movie where they keep in the Misty Mountains song, and they do the song where they're doing all the washing up, and they're like, that's what Bilbo Baggins hates. And it's like, this is fun. I'm having a great time. Why have you only done this for the first half an hour of the movie? and then not for the rest of it. I was going to do a whole bit in this video where I talked about like movies having a 3-act structure and how the fan edit is really weird because the first act lasts half an hour and the second act lasts like 3 hours. But I didn't want to go into like explaining all that stuff because I barely understand it. Like I never went to film school. There you go. I'll put a link to where you can watch this fan edit in the description. It is 4.5 hours long, so you're probably best off watching it in bits. I'm gonna look like a massive hypocrite because I always say that I don't watch TV series because they take too long, and then I just sat down and watched a 4.5 hour long movie. Such an idiot. Let me know what you think of The Hobbit. Maybe you've got fonder memories of The Hobbit. It just seems really bad to me because I love The Lord of the Rings so much that it's very obvious that The Hobbit is trying to be it and failing. But yeah, I'll see you next time when I'll be talking about something. Maybe it's going to be something relevant for once and not a 7-year-old movie franchise that no one cares about. Bye!